Hello, I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz. We are so glad that you're joining us today. And it is unbelievable that we just put up our 40th episode with chapter 14.
It's true.
Wow. And it has not even been a full year yet. And yet,
Here we are.
here we are. God has been good and faithful, and we thank you, our listeners, for your inspiration, your feedback, and the relationships that we formed with you.
Be sure to continue to like and subscribe and tell all your friends. You can catch up and stay current with our blogs, our vodcast, and podcast on our website. And just browse around. You can see our merchandise at livelifeinthespirit.com. Before we dive into chapter 15, let's just take a few minutes and kind of see where we've been. So we started out by learning that the book of Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ himself. And it's the first we've heard from him since Acts. And if you remember, we also learned that Revelation has something else extra special about it.
Well, it's the only book in the Bible that promises a special blessing to all who read it aloud and to all who hear it and pay attention to what is written in these words. Those two things alone make it worth reading from the very beginning to the end. Right away in Revelation, we get into the letters that Jesus himself wrote to the churches. And as we know that it was the churches back then, the churches in the middle, and now today, and the churches in the end time. But there's more to it than that, because as we continue to go through all the different chapters of Revelation, there are so many references back to those letters.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a good foundational piece for sure. And then John gave us a glimpse into the very throne room of God in heaven. The glory and wonder that he saw and tried his best to express to us.
That's just impossible to even fathom in your head as you're even reading it. What it'll be like.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. They can make a song about that.
They should make a song like that.
They really should.
Which, did you realize that if you listen to the words of I Can Only Imagine, it's talking about that very thing. It's Revelation 4 and 5, the throne room of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how many, when you know the scriptures or when you're reading the scriptures, and you'll read a line and all of a sudden you just start singing the song that goes with it. You go, I didn't realize that went with this spot.
I never made the connection. So then after that comes the redemption of humanity, and the portion with Jesus as our Goel. And I love this part because it gives us a little glimpse. It says thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000 angels. I think it's very easy to think of a small number of angels when really there are multitudes of angels.
Well, and especially when so much of the media that's out there now, whatever you listen to, it focuses on those 200. The 200 is like not even a blip. I mean, they're pretty big at what they did, and that's why I guess it's focused on. But we're talking millions and billions of angels. It's hard to wrap our. I mean, for every person that's out there, there's at least an angel, and I'm talking throughout all time, probably.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I know we probably tend to focus on even not just the 200, but the ones that fell and the ones that are bad, but there's 2/3 of them that are good.
Exactly. 2/3 did not fall. And that's what I love about this book, because throughout the whole part, and we're going to see diving into 15, 16, and 17, as we go on, God brings in more angels. If this angel gets to do that, this angel gets to do that, this one gets to do that.
It really highlights just how interconnected we all are.
And how he didn't need to have them do anything, and yet he allowed them to be a part of this ministry just like he lets us be a part of his ministry. I think that's really cool.
It is.
And we miss that.
We often miss that, yeah. But they are proclaiming his worthiness and his holiness, and it says they're worshiping him with every creature everywhere. And it talks about in the air and in the sea and on the land and under the earth, so all over.
Everything. Even inanimate objects. He said the mountains and the rocks and the seas and will cry out, the trees.
The very rocks.
Think of the song, and the trees will clap their hands. And they're just, and the rocks will cry out. Even Jesus said that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we see that this is when things really start to get real going, as we're just kind of recapping here, because there's the sevens, the 7 seals at the beginning, and then it was the 7 trumpets. Well, all that is leading up to today with the 7, and I shouldn't say today, but this is kind of the bridge one, getting ready for 16, that will be the 7 bowl judgments. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's Jesus who actually opened up the first of the 7 seals, bringing in the start of the tribulation. That's even more comforting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I think we're in a time frame right now where the world is on edge and everyone's asking, are we in the tribulation? No, you know it. Are we in the tribulation? Now, this is pre-tribulation. Right. But it's not a when will it happen, how will it happen, like the earth has control of this, or mankind does. No, it's literally Christ himself who goes,
the scroll.
Now is the time.
Right.
And it marks it right there. And that opening brings forth the 4 horsemen, mm-hmm. which they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And that's what we're really going to get into a little more in 16.
Yeah.
Iron that out. But the 4 horsemen are what start this whole thing.
Sure.
And it starts with a massive earthquake. Again, see, this was all back in chapters 7 and 8, but we're going to be looking at it again in 16. Mm-hmm. So when we say it's not chronological order, it's not. And right. That's where it can get really confusing because it's the same kind of story, sometimes a little twist at the very end, but much of the same.
And from different perspectives, or they'll show different, like a broader picture of it. Okay, this is maybe the spiritual war that's happening during it, mm-hmm. or this is what's happening in the whole world while this is, or
this is a general overview, and then the next one they get into specifics, and that's where we said you got to know Daniel, you got to know Zechariah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and pull all this together to get the full picture. But that's where the 144,000 are marked then with the seal of God. And why is that important?
Because the gates of hell are going to be opened soon, and they are protected from the horror that is unleashed on earth from the gates of hell.
So what is that a reminiscent of? We talk about the parallels between Old Testament and New Testament. We're going to see more of that later, but...
That's the Passover. That's basic.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Those who were marked with God's seal. It was for protection.
Mm-hmm. And and we talked about that when we talked about that chapter, but it is truly a seal of protection unlike anything else.
Mm-hmm. And hence why then the beast, why the Antichrist requires the seal. Everything again. We've looked at that before, but it is the parallel. Mm-hmm. What God required, the Antichrist does, but he twists it just a little. It's never on the good side.
No, of course not.
So God is requiring a seal of protection and redemption. The Antichrist is going to require the seal to keep from persecution and elimination, mm-hmm. or annihilation.
Right. Well, the 7th seal ushers in the trumpet judgments, and that's another batch of just wonderfulness unleashed on the earth. So there's hail and fire mixed with blood that's being hurled down. And then the thirds, the third of the sea, a third of the rivers, a third of the stars, destroyed, made bitter, put out, so that a third of the day and a third of the night are in complete darkness now.
So what is that also reminiscent of?
That would be Moses and Pharaoh and all of the plagues that he sent to try to turn Pharaoh's heart, which mm-hmm. that's what's happening right now anyways. God is continuing to turn up the heat to try to get people to turn to him.
Right. And
then toward the end of the trumpet judgments, the gates of hell are opened. Demonic locusts they're called locusts, but they don't look like any locusts we've ever seen. And they
demonic hordes.
Yes. Sting like a scorpion and look somewhat animal and dragon-like, all different kinds of things. But they can torture, but not kill. But people will wish for death, and it won't come.
Because it will be complete. That's what torture mm-hmm. is. Longing for death and not being able to have it.
And then 4 angels that have been tied up for this particular time are released, and they kill a third of mankind with fire, smoke, and sulfur. So the trumpet judgments Boy, when you just put them all together like
and
that.
that has reminiscent of what? Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh, absolutely.
The fire, the smoke, the sulfur, the brimstone.
Oh, yeah. Fire and brimstone, which there's a lot of interesting... when we were in Israel, we learned a little bit more about... right around that time they were talking about the fact that the location...
of Sodom and Gomorrah is actually different than what they've always thought. They thought it was in the southeast corner. Come to find out, they really believe that it is in the northwest corner of the Dead Sea.
And they think what happened was a massive, like a meteor hit the Dead Sea, right? And that all of that water would have come hot boiling water came and there's evidence of that just completely wiping out that whole area.
And that's how Lot's wife became the pillar of salt, because when she turned to look, she got sprayed.
Right.
With that water.
Which
would say, well, then why didn't Lot and his daughters get it from behind? Well, he was walking with an angel. So I am sure
they had some protection.
If she had been with them, up there, but she didn't.
Right.
She got out of his protection and turned back.
Didn't work out in her favor.
No, it did not. And then we looked at the two witnesses that were in Revelation chapter 12.
So then we're introduced and we start getting into the connections between Satan and the beast and the false prophet and then the image of the beast. And we went through those chapters and kind of learned about all that. Again, another step back out of order, but to look at the kind of major evil players in this end time.
Well, and for me, I think the exciting thing was when we looked at chapter 13, that was perfect timing with the eclipse and NASA and CERN and everything that's going on right now. It's like you can see everything playing out right before our eyes, how the connections are, how they fit.
Absolutely. And then that just brought us right up to last week with the Lamb and the 144,000 and then the harvesting of people from the earth. And that again was a broad stroke, literally, with the sickle. Of
pretty sobering too.
But that's what will happen at the very end, and so this is again out of order.
Well, that brings us right now to what we're going to look at in chapter 15, which is actually kind of a short chapter, and it's a bridge chapter that takes us into 16, which is going to kind of go back with what we just kind of summarized. Yep. And then it's going to get into Armageddon. So you're not going to want to miss the next one. So I think we'll just go ahead and dive right into 15.
Sounds good. I saw in heaven another great and marvelous sign, 7 angels with the 7 last plagues. Last, because with them God's wrath is completed. And I saw what looked like a sea of glass glowing with fire, and standing beside the sea, those who had been victorious over the beast and its image, and over the number of its name. They held harps given them by God, and sang the song of God's servant Moses and of the Lamb.
Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of all nations. Who will not fear you, Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations shall come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed.
After this I looked, and I saw in heaven the temple, that is the tabernacle of the covenant law, and it was opened. Out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues. They were dressed in clean, shining linen and wore golden sashes around their chests.
And then one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls filled with the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed.
So as is usual for the book of Revelation, this chapter leaves much for us to unpack. It's the beginning of the end. After these 7 bold judgments, God's wrath is complete. All of the grace and mercy and time that he has given every person to choose him, to choose wisely, has now come to an end. His wrath will be poured out on all of those who chose poorly.
And you can't help but not think of Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. Yeah. Chose wisely or he chose poorly. the sevens that we're getting into. The seven there's a lot of sevens, and while there are numbers that mean things, it does mean completion, and throughout most of this, even in chapter 16, we're going to see.
So verse 2 really highlights that for us. The sea of glass glowing with fire. When I originally read that, I thought, ooh, that sounds pretty. But then you get to reading more. No, the sea of glass that's referring to humanity, in this case, is glowing with fire because there's judgment there and they're facing eternal damnation.
Yeah.
That's not...
Jesus talked about this quite a bit, the fire and the brimstone. And it's... and yes, a sea is not water.
Right.
It's the sea of humanity. We see throughout
all of Revelation.
Yep.
And then, well, and if you had any questions, standing beside that sea were those who had been victorious over the beast and its image and over the number of its name. And I love this. They sang the song of Moses and of the Lamb. And I know this is one of your favorite parts.
Well, it is, because it is, if you know the song, it's the Magnificat. And I've been wrestling with them. If I'm going to include this in it or not, I might. It's not copyrighted, I don't think. I'm pretty sure it's too old for that. But our little high school choir, and when I say little, 52 strong, but that was pretty good for a whole K through 12 of 200. So
that's a large chunk of the kids, yeah.
Anyway, we had an awesome choir, and we sang, it's 8-part harmony, a cappella. And it is, I did not realize the Magnificat, even when we sang it, that this was based right out of Revelation chapter 15. And it gives you goosebumps. You know, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's a song, and I would sing it if I know the tune. And I'm like, ooh, I know it. I even know the alto part. But it gives you goosebumps.
It is
when
incredible.
You hear it. And it's something about that particular arrangement, it feels right. It just does. It's like there had to have been some divine intervention when that song was created and written and penned, because you can feel the angels and everybody else just singing that around the throne room. But it's written by both Moses and Jesus, which represents what?
The law and then the love.
The love and grace of the Lamb.
Well, and I didn't realize this, but apparently Moses sang 2 songs.
Yeah, actually, and it could be 3. It was in, he sang 2. It was in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, but it's referred to in Acts.
Okay.
As well.
And then the Song of the Lamb.
You know, Moses just said he couldn't speak. That's why he wanted Aaron. Never said he couldn't sing.
This is true.
You know, when you think about it, growing up in Pharaoh's court and stuff, he was probably given music lessons. I mean, the finer things in life. So he probably
very well have sung.
You know, and there again, they say sometimes that the reason why he said he couldn't speak was he had a stutter. We don't know if he had a stutter or speech impediment, but
oftentimes people who do can sing without problems.
that's right. Think of Mel Tillis. And
That's right.
so in this Magnificat, if you break it down, this song is about 3 things. It's about the works of God, the ways of God, and the worth of God, the worship. So it's talking about the works. Great and marvelous are your deeds, which is works. And just and true are your ways. And then it talks about who will not fear you, who will bring glory to your name.
You alone are holy.
And then the worship, and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed.
Just really encompasses all those 3 things. So then we see that the temple, or rather the tabernacle of the covenant law, is in heaven. And it's been discussed previously that there was a rebuilding of the temple, or at least the tabernacle. Some part of that has to happen. But then there's also a heavenly version of it, or it moves up there. We don't know for sure.
Well, we know that
works.
there's an ark of the covenant in heaven, but I think it's probably 2 different kinds.
Right.
But this one would be a representation of the one that's already up there.
You're right. And maybe when God created the one on earth, he just did it to replicate what was already in heaven. So 7 angels with the final 7 plagues come out of it. So it's not the first time we have heard it mentioned in this chapter, and it's not the first time angels have come out of it to help deliver God's wrath and judgment. You know, the angel came from there to say, okay, Jesus, it's time to harvest. And then the second harvest came as well. So
I think it's just really interesting that that it came from the temple. That it puts more authority behind it. No, they weren't just flying around in heaven and, or in some celestial space and just decide now is the time, but they come
came
from the holiest place.
Absolutely.
To deliver this, that it is 100% God's backing and holiness and judgment. But his judgments are, just like the Magnificat said, true and just. He's not just willy-nilly judging humanity. He's giving them every last possible effort.
And opportunity. Absolutely.
Well, then one of the 4 living creatures gave the bowls. So I envisioned these bowls as being the golden incense of what the priest would bring before God, and those incense bowls are what? Full of our prayers in heaven. Prayers of the saints. Of the people. Exactly. So the priest would carry those bowls around in the aroma before the presence of God. All right. So now think about that. It is the prayers of the people, that's the incense in the bowls, that these bowls are what are given to the angels to pour out that wrath on earth. But they're given out by who?
Those 4 living creatures, which
exactly.
is interesting.
And the 4 living creatures are actually another part of that angelic realm. They are created. They're like the seraphim, the cherubim. I mean, they're like one difference. They got 2 extra wings, but they're pretty much the same. So God had created them just for that. Again, this is just one more. Each one has a title. Each one has a job. Each one has something special to do.
We're all an important piece of this massive puzzle.
If the angels were going in to get it, they could have just taken it, but they didn't, because that wasn't theirs to do. It was the 4 living creatures. The sole job, besides praising God, was to take the bowl and give it to the angel, and then the angel takes it and administers. It's just neat how I think of like the Olympics. You know, it's not one person doesn't take the torch and run it all the way up and light it.
Right. It's
handed off. Mm-hmm. Yep. Each one is important. Each one gets that opportunity, and that's their job. And what a thrill!
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So then these angels that have the bowls, that pour out the bowls. I love the description of them. They're in bright white with gold sash and everything. And it's just such a contrast of what they're carrying, what they're about to do. They're not angels in dark robes. You know, I don't know why you see in a lot of the media stuff, everything's a Grim Reaper, everything's dark, everything's black. No, here you have the complete purity of God, the refined by fire.
Right.
And it is this angelic realm that is going to pour out the darkness of God's wrath.
Because it's not coming from darkness. This is wiping out darkness, really.
Brought about by themselves. Yeah, but it's just such a contrast. It's like, wow, if you really get a chance, if you really give yourself a chance to think about that image.
It is quite the contrast. So it's interesting, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on why would his final wrath and judgment come from the temple, come from the tabernacle? Why would that be where it comes from? Because that's where the angel comes from to tell Jesus with the sickle. This is where the bowl judgments come from.
That's the beginning and the end. That's the holy. I mean, it's basically the temple, the throne room. I think of the same as being all in one. It's God's holiness. It's his final judgment. Yeah. His completion, if you would say.
That makes sense.
And he's let that go on for so long. But there does come a time when that completion happens.
Well, and 7 is mentioned 8 times, and there are 8 verses. And as you said, 7 does mean completion. And the last ones are the wrath of God, and afterwards it means that it's complete. And I didn't realize this until studying this with you. This is really cool.
Well, it is the same word that in Greek, John wrote down when Jesus said, "It is finished." It's the same finish, same completeness. For Jesus, it was the finishment, the final atonement of sin and death. It was the final atonement of the sacrificial system. Here with God, it is finished. It is the final
judgment.
Mm-hmm. So if you know your Old Testament and you've read Psalms 85, Psalms 85 goes right along with this. The psalmist is asking, how long will you be angry with us forever? It's a rhetorical question. It's like, no, will you show us your mercy? Yes. Surely his salvation is near to those who follow and dwell in your land. But it is a foreshadowing, and it is a prophetic piece of writing that is talking about the end days.
And the fact that he won't be angry forever, but there will come a time.
So as we wrap up 15, as we said, it's a short little bridge chapter that gets us into 16, into that final bit, into Armageddon.
Into those 7 bowl judgments.
Right, the end of everything. And again, it's not in chronological order, because there's a whole lot of chapters. There's 2 chapters after that before Christ comes back.
Which would happen at the end of this.
At the end of 19, yes. It gets confusing. if you sit there and you read it and you think, I got it, and then all of a sudden you're scratching your head going, wait a minute, I don't got it. You're not alone. It can be very confusing, especially if you're reading this through, trying to look at it as a timeline. I think something that actually helped me this week in my Hebrew class, I was taking, my instructor said something that he never mentioned before, but he said with the other languages, see, the problem is if you speak English like we do, everything's, of course, left to right, and it's in order. When you see your sentence structure, this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. But when you read Hebrew, and then German is even worse, or Russian, the construct of the sentence can be all garbled up. Oh, and Greek, that's even worse yet. So basically, You can have like your noun be we would have it be at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be at the end, but you're just supposed to know that. I mean, it can be just all messed up. It's not in any chronological order of that sentence and why it can get so confusing. And I think that's a lot to be said with Revelation, because it's kind of the same way. It's not in a chronological order that we would read it in English, and so it gets even more confusing.
Oh, absolutely.
I wonder if a person, and I'm sure there's probably many books on this, like this, have taken it piece by piece out and kind of put it together in a chronological
Sure.
order. Along with Daniel and bring in Zechariah and bring in, like I said, all those Old Testament scriptures and fit in all those pieces. And I'm sure there is. I just
haven't read it.
I guess if you have all, go ahead, email us.
We would love to see it.
Flood us with all the books that you know of that kind of do it in chronological order. But it's all about completion.
It is.
And that's what the number 7 is all about, what it stands for. Mm-hmm. We know the 144 is a representation. We know that God has everything about fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And that completion is a completedness in his love and in his grace and in his mercy. And he is holding everything out until the end, so that way people will come to him.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's all about.
It really is. And that's the most important thing to take from all of this, is that he's giving us ample opportunities to turn to him. Don't wait until all of this.
So in my best Indiana Jones, hopefully you will choose wisely instead of choosing poorly. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And you can't say, we didn't tell you. Until next time.
Shalom.